Ms. Cottman, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us as we are wrapping up April. And for those that aren't aware, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Yes.
And being that we got two key things that are happening throughout the year, of course, this month and of course, Domestic Violence Awareness Month is coming up in October. So it's a great idea to start the conversation. I hate to start the conversation with such tragedy that we're coming off of. Every day that we hear stories about women losing their lives is always a tragedy. But before we get to that conversation, I want to officially introduce you, Karma Cottman, the executive director of Ujima, National Center on Domestic Violence in the Black community. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you so much for what you do. And there's always a backstory because I was watching a couple of videos that you recently did, I believe during the pandemic or after with Alyssa Milano,
Yeah.
and then there was the most recent interview. But a lot of times we don't hear the backstory of why you're so passionate about domestic violence. Can you share?
Absolutely. Well, I am passionate because I'm just passionate about Black women. I'm passionate about Black children. I'm passionate about our community. I started doing the work when I was a college student at Florida A&M University. So proud HBCU student, and just saw so many students prior to my arrival on campus, the year before my arrival on campus, someone had been murdered, young woman murdered in a dorm. And so that really sparked my interest, and then seeing it with family and friends, absolutely, was something that I felt very, very connected to, but particularly connected to our experiences in the Black community.
Definitely. So, getting to the conversation, many people saw the most recent murder suicide involving former Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax and his wife, Dr. Serena Fairfax. And
Yeah.
not only that, the story most recently about the gentleman from Shreveport, Louisiana, Shamar Elkins, murdering 8 children, seven which were his, and also shooting his wife. And there was also a friend involved. These stories, really hit home, but there's also the local stories that touch us as well. Why is it so important for us to get this message out here, not only today, but just throughout?
Well, I mean, I'll just start with some statistics. What we know is that 1 in 4 Black women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime. Black women are 6 times more likely to be murdered as a result of intimate partner violence, particularly when there is a handgun involved. We experience sexual assault at higher rates. 40% of the people trafficked in the United States are Black women. So the statistics say that this is a crisis for us in our community. I think very often there are also, when we think about it, we each know someone who's experienced domestic violence, who has experienced sexual assault. But I think we don't often know how prevalent it is in our community because these things have been things that we keep behind closed doors. And so
Mm.
when I think about what is happening now, where there is attention to these issues, but we know that there are countless other women who are experiencing violence. Since the beginning of this year, we have had 7 domestic violence related homicides of Black women across the country, including the 2 that you just mentioned, and that's not including those 8 children whose lives were taken, many
Mm.
of whom they are happening in front of children. So not
Mm.
only is there the loss of the life of that mother, those children's lives are changed and impacted forever.
You said one thing, we all know someone that knows someone. Whether it's a personal situation that we face, it's like a chain command. In the Black community, there's often the culture. What
Yes.
happens in the home stays in the home. How do we change that mindset amongst one another?
It's education, Robin. We have to say that it is not okay. I've seen so many, you remember in 2020, there were a lot of hashtags like protect Black women.
Yeah.
We got, we were talking about keep Black and women safe, but we've got to know that that's not a moniker. That's not just a hashtag. That has to be a mantra for us in our everyday lives. We've also got to change the discourse around domestic violence. It is not something that happens behind closed doors and should be kept secret. We've got to talk to survivors because they should not live in shame. They should not be afraid of losing their community. When I talk to survivors, and I talk with survivors often, when I talk with them about what are their fears, what are you concerned about? And most certainly they're concerned about the violence that's happening in their homes. But more than that, they are concerned that if they tell, they will lose their community. They will lose their family. They will lose their friends. They will lose their church community. So we've got to make it safe for people to tell us when they're experiencing violence.
One thing, and I wrote it down, we need to believe our survivors.
We
Is that
have
an
got
issue?
We have got to believe Black women. One of the things that happens for us is Black women historically have been over sexualized. We have been told that violence is almost a birthright because our job is to keep our community safe, to keep our children safe. And in doing so, Black women are almost expected to sacrifice ourselves, our bodies, and our safety in order to keep the rest of our community safe. There are very real issues of over incarceration. There are very real issues with how systems engage in our communities. We know that Black children are overwhelmingly in the child welfare system. We know that Black men are arrested at higher rates and are very often harmed or sometimes harmed in the course of those things. But that does not mean that we as Black women don't deserve to be safe. So I'm all for saying, the don't snitch culture doesn't mean that you have to be harmed, right? This idea that I talk, Robin, to some people who say, in the case of Dr. Serena Fairfax, here you have this person who is a prominent person in the community, and so many women that I talk to who say, I have experienced violence in my home, but people say, oh no, you got a good man, girl. You got a, that adage, you got a good man, Savannah, keep him, right? And so, again, for our economic welfare, Black women are told to stay in these relationships. Sometimes, we're doing a lot of education with churches and with pastors because sometimes, even through scripture, we're telling women to stay in unsafe environments. So, across the board, from church to home, from friend to parent, there has got to be education around the impact of domestic violence, how harmful it can be, how it shows up, and then what is our role in responding.
As we continue this conversation, I want people to understand, and you did mention statistics, 100% is all. There's 40% of Black women that experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. Please let that sink in as we continue to talk. You know, we were doing a walk last year, and someone pulled me aside and asked me, does this really make a difference?
Mm,
you
mm,
know and in my mind I answered like, yes, it makes a difference, but in the back of my mind, sometimes I don't think so. Could we be doing more than marching and just, I don't know, feeling concern and compassion? I feel like there's something else that we can do before we hear those stories where it's the
mm.
outcome of someone's life being lost. Speak to me on that.
Yes. That's very real, right? Is what can we be doing? Those marches and every time we talk about it, it does matter because it signals to survivors that it's safe to tell. So that's the first thing. Women have got to feel like they can talk about the violence that they're experiencing in their home without judgment. But there is much more we can do. We can educate ourselves. We can talk about what it means to be in healthy and safe relationships. We can tell women and girls and men and boys that they don't have to be in a relationship. If it feels unsafe, you don't have to be in a relationship. You are okay by yourself. But we know that people seek love, so we got to talk about what it means to be in a healthy relationship.
Mhm.
Raven, I'm sorry, Robin, we did this. survey of 100 young people. They were in high school, and we asked them about the healthy relationships that they see and who would they model. And those 100 young people, not a one talked about their parents or an aunt or a neighbor. Each one of them, every single one of them, they named people like Jay-Z and Beyonce and Barack and Michelle Obama, but they didn't talk about people who they know and in their community. So it's a charge for us to model for young people in our lives what a healthy relationship looks like.
Hmm. I want to shift gears a little bit because, it's easy to watch the TV.
Hmm.
It's easy to sit back and comment, like, why don't you just leave the
Mm,
relationship? People
absolutely.
often say, why didn't you just leave? Can you explain the real barriers, the real concern when you get to that point, a woman in a domestic violence situation?
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Robin, because it is very often that's the first thing we say, right? Partially because we want you to be safe. And so we're like, why didn't you just leave? But the real reason is because that moment that a woman or a man, when they leave a violent situation, that moment is the single most dangerous time in the relationship. Because you've got to remember, they've been in a relationship where someone is exerting power and control. And they've been telling them, if you leave, no one else is going to want you. If you leave, I'm going to harm not only you, but the children, and or your family or your friends. And so that victim knows that that person will make good on it. So the moment that you leave is the moment that that person is losing power and losing control. And that's when we see them exert the most harm. We don't leave because where do we go? Do you leave and lose your home? Do your kids leave and lose everything that they know and is familiar to them to go into a shelter? We don't leave because we're afraid the systems won't believe us. We're afraid that our family and friends will judge us. We don't leave because we are supposed to be strong Black women and we're not supposed to experience this kind of violence. So when we admit that we are vulnerable, when we admit that we are weak, that makes us that deters us from actually seeking assistance. So it harkens back to that question that you asked earlier, Robin, about what can we as family and friends do. And the first thing that we can do is we can make sure that we are listening without judgment, that if our strong friend has to come to us and say that they're experiencing violence, that we will be educated enough to say to them, I hear you and I'm here for you, without any judgment.
I love that you said women and men. What does this look like for a man that's being abused?
So what we know is, Robin, that overwhelmingly the victimization happens to women, but it absolutely happens to men. And so when men are experiencing violence, all of these things are compounded, right? Because men
Mhm.
are supposed to be physically stronger. So it's like, man, how could you let this happen to you? When law enforcement comes out, very often they are not believed. And also, they have this sense of being masculine. And so, who do they tell? Do you tell your family or friends? Do you tell a pastor? Who do they feel like they can tell? Because they don't. They're not supposed to be vulnerable in this way. So the manifestation of the violence may at sometimes look similar, but the supports are not the same. I will classify that with, though, in our community, it looks very different. And the reason is because Black women are often seen as aggressive, right? And so, very often, that whole angry Black woman or that strong Black woman moniker is the very thing that keeps us in an unsafe relationship. And for a man who may be experiencing violence, it's hard for them to say what has happened, right? Because it's not just an argument, it may be physical. And then there they are talking about this physicality when they are supposed to be able to, quote unquote, handle themselves in any situation.
So we have people listening, they're watching this and they're ready. What are the steps that they need to do?
So the first thing I say is to make sure you have a safety plan. The safety plan is key because you need to know, any of us know when your adrenaline is going, sometimes you forget, right? What you need to do to stay safe. So have that safety plan so you know like simple things. Where are your keys? Do you have your wallet? Do you have your ATM card? Do you have emergency cash? Do you know how you're going to get to a safe place? Remember, Robin, that for many of us, we take the same route to work. We take the same route to the grocery store. We take the same route to drop the kids off to school. And so you need to have in your mind an alternate route just in case someone is following you or is going to show up at any of those places. So that safety plan is key. Keeping a log of what has happened over the course of the relationship. Because if you have to seek a custody order, or if you have to seek a protection or police or peace order, you have to talk about the incidents. What harm has occurred? And if you're like me, you can't remember sometimes what happened last week, much less what
Right,
happened a few
right.
months ago, right? And so that log is indispensable because you don't have to recall dates and times. You'll have them there written. And I often say, if you have to keep this information and you're afraid that you can't keep them in the home, keep them with a family friend, keep them with a neighbor, someone that you know is safe, where you can maintain the information. And then lastly, just know the resources in your community. Where is the local shelter? Where does the community-based organization exist? Know the hotline number, the 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-799-7233, if you have to be connected with a crisis response.
You repeat that number just one more time.
Absolutely. 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-799-7233.
Now, there was one thing that you mentioned with your interview that I had seen, that there's a lot of local support. I know that Ujima is nationally, but there's a lot of local support. And a lot of people didn't realize, and I'm so glad that I watched the interview that you did with Alyssa Milano. You talked a lot about COVID and how our local support had to get out there in the midst
Yes.
of COVID to help people in domestic violence situations. So it's so important for people to donate their time, donate money if possible, those resources to our local domestic violence shelters and centers, throughout, because they're in the forefront helping people transition properly. So I think that that is wonderful. Now, of course, for those that aren't familiar with what you do on a national level, can you explain how you guys are helping us locally as well?
Absolutely. So we work with those local culturally specific organizations. We provide training and technical assistance. We work with law enforcement. We work with the courts to make sure that when they do respond, they understand the realities for, especially for Black women and for Black survivors. We work with child welfare systems to really make sure that when women report, they are also able to keep their children. We do advocate for policies, both local, state, and national, to ensure that, there are firearms protections, to ensure that women have access to protection orders, and that those protection orders are good across jurisdictional lines. We do training, TA, we do research and evaluation, and we do a lot of community awareness. So we come to local communities and work with communities to raise awareness about these issues.
Glad that we're having this conversation too, because a lot of times you don't know where to reach or who to reach out to. So that's another thing, another resource that you provide. If someone wanted to call you, you would able to connect them to someone locally in their area. So I think that that's wonderful. And for those that definitely want to connect directly online, ujimacommunity.org, is that correct?
Yes, that's it.
ujimacommunity.org, and we'll have the information posted below, again, with the phone number. I want to ask this, and I'll let you go. From a community standpoint, like hair salons, barbershops,
Absolutely.
where people go day to day. What should we be looking out for? Because it's not a smart idea to involve yourself physically, in
Mm.
situations. But if you're aware and you know what to look out for, maybe we can call or certain things. How can we help as a community, to pay attention? Because we should be paying attention.
We all have a role, Robin. We all have a role. And so sometimes it's as simple as, sis, do you need some help? right? You're
Mm.
sitting in my chair and you are disclosing something that alarm bells are going off that she's saying, you know what, I can't, you see someone calling me. I've only been in your chair for an hour and a half and I have 10 calls checking in to see where I am, what time I'm leaving, what that's controlling, right? When we see someone who is talking about or has mentioned that they don't feel comfortable in their relationship, or you see someone sort of wincing when they get that call, you know what I mean? There are telltale signs. It's just as simple as saying, "Can I help? Are you okay?" Sometimes that opens the door and it signals that you are a safe space for me to share. And then I encourage people, Robin, at ujimacommunity.org, we've got talking points for people who are in community, whether it's your family, your friend, you're at the barber shop, you're at the hairdresser. We've got talking points so that you can talk someone through if they're experiencing violence. Here's what you can do. Here's the local community-based organization. And then the last thing is avail yourself of the resources that are available. So know what exists in your community. Know where the community-based organizations are. Know where the culturally specific organizations are. And then if you are a family member or a friend who has more intimate knowledge of someone who's experiencing domestic violence, I can't tell you, Robin, how many times my friends may call me and I already have the log for them. I'm like, girl, on X date, I know X, Y, and Z happened. Because sometimes, and it's not us infringing, so you're not going to use that information for anything, but you know when your friends are going through something. And so you being able to be that support, you could just jot some things down to say, hey, I noticed on this day, or, I remember at this time, this happened. So that when they do need to recall information, you can help them with that.
Mm, that's wonderful. I thank you for taking the time, and I know that you've got so much planned because this is something that you're going to be working 24/7, just trying to make a difference. What is Ujima up to? Do you have some things that are coming up that we all need to be aware of, and maybe we can support?
We do. Actually, we have a town hall this evening from 6 to 7:30 that we're doing with the Black Women's Roundtable and an organization that we work with, a call to men, because we recognize that men's voices are important in this journey. And so a call to men is partnering with us just to really talk about what's happened over the course of the last few weeks. People are reeling and they want time and community and space, and they want to know, just like you asked, what do we do? So we have a town hall this evening. Monthly, we have what we call coffee and conversations, and those are open to anyone. But it's really just a time for us to come together, talk about things that are going on in our community, share resources, and share information. We have Healing the Healers that will happen this summer. So we'll be in local communities bringing resources, especially to those culturally specific organizations that are working 24/7 to give them a moment for some healing and some space. And then we'll have some back to school information because we work very closely with HBCUs across the country. So we're going to be doing some back to school information and getting into those HBCUs, providing young people with resources as well.
Wow, I thank you for your dedication. It's enlightening and it's just so comforting to know that we have people in our community like you. So we
Thank
thank you for your work and we'll definitely be here to support you. And you can find all of the information on the website again at ujimacommunity.org.
Yes.
And if you can, give us that phone number one more time.
Yes. So the two numbers. One is the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. And then to reach Ujima, 844 Ujima.
Thank you so much for your time. And
Thank
we're going to be
you.
doing some things. I just feel it.
Absolutely. I feel it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.